Dr. Robin, how do I make sense of the recent scandal surrounding some figures that I've always admired? For example, the allegations about Bessel van der Kolk that he was bullying and that he intimidated and perhaps even sexually harassed staffers in his office. I don't know what to make of that. There are a lot of people whose books I found influential, and now I've heard these terrible allegations. Am I supposed to discount their books? Am I supposed to discount the part of me that really resonated with the author of the book? Like, when I read those books, I feel a connection to those authors because I feel like they're talking directly to me. And now I am so confused. Hi, I'm Dr. Robin Koslowitz, YouTube's post-traumatic parenting expert. Today I'm responding to a question a member of the post-traumatic parenting community asked about her own feelings of betrayal and letdown in hearing about the recent allegations about Bessel van der Kolk and some other leading theorists in the field of trauma recovery and in the field of self-help, and how to make sense of that. If you're a post-traumatic parent and these allegations really rocked your world, if it really bothers you to think about them, welcome. We get it. We've been there. We're post-traumatic parents too. If this is a topic that you want to hear more about, or if you want to think more about the intersection of trauma and parenting, please click subscribe below so you never miss another episode. So yes, there have been allegations about Bessel van der Kolk, the author of The Body Keeps the Score, about an overall unpleasant work environment, harassment of employees, being fired from his Trauma Research Institute, because of a lot of these behaviors, and a lot of controversy around that. So I just want to first of all acknowledge that emotional experience, because I think that sometimes when you read a book, some books, I call it naming the water. Sometimes you will read a book that talks about something that very much resonates with your own experience of your experience, but it's something that no one ever put into words for you before. And if you know the famous New Yorker cartoon where there are two fish and they're swimming in an aquarium, and a man leans over and says, "Hey fellas, how's the water?" And one person looks at the other, one of the fish looks at the other and says, "What the heck is water?" Some books name the water because to a fish, the water is the world, right? They don't think of it as water that they're swimming through. They're just living their lives, swimming through what they're swimming through, because that's their life. Sometimes a book names the water. And when you look at that book and you say, yeah, trauma, for example, has had this invisible influence on my whole life. That's it. That's the missing piece of the puzzle. I always knew that there was this thing, something was different about me than my friends. Something was new to me, something I didn't know what it was. It's trauma. That book named the water. I feel like other books that named the water, Jonathan Haidt's The Anxious Generation named the water for me a little bit. It's like, yeah, social media has really changed things for kids. There are just books like that, and I would love to hear from people watching this video. I think there's a lot of books that named the water for people. So if you want to comment below and tell me a book that you read that named the water for you and you were like, oh yeah, whoa, paradigm shift. I see my entire life and the entire world completely differently for now. I never saw it that way. I feel like Carol Gilligan's book In a Different Voice named the water. Women have different moral reasoning than men. Women have different priorities when they're deciding certain things than men do. Yeah, oh, naming the water. Eve Rodsky named the water in Fair Play, right? There are sometimes people who just name the water and it's like, this is so blindingly obvious and yet I never thought of it. So Bessel van der Kolk named the water in his book, The Body Keeps the Score. And So for people who read a book like that and they feel so felt, they feel so heard and so understood, it makes a lot of sense to transfer certain feelings of, wow, this person's my savior. This is the best person in the world. This person is like, and think of any savior figure that you've ever thought of in your life. This person is like Superman and I don't know, all rolled in. Superman and Mary Poppins and Mr. Rogers are all rolled into one, because like, wow, this person is making me feel so heard and seen and understood and resonated with. Wow, this must be the most incredible person in the world. And then you hear that, no, actually they're human. And now I'm only speaking about Bessel van der Kolk. The other authors that I mentioned, not one of them have I heard any negative allegations about. So I just want to make that very, very, very clear that when I was talking about naming the water, those authors were just authors who, when I read their book, I was struck by something that I sort of always knew but didn't have words for. And then they said it so eloquently that I said, yes, that's it. So I just want to make that very clear. But when somebody names the water for you, especially when it's a water that's really confusing for you, I think for a lot of people, narcissism is something where when someone tells them the concept of narcissism and they've been parented by a narcissistic person or they had a narcissistic older relative who really hurt them and was confusing and made them feel like a piece of garbage as they were growing up and they had so much damage from it. Then someone says, oh, that's called narcissism. Oh yeah, that's what it is. Or when the narcissistic person uses DARVO, right? Deny, attack, reverse victim, and offender. It's like, oh, there's this technique. It's called DARVO. They do it. It comes right out of their playbook. Oh yeah, that's it. That happens to me all the time. They're always doing that. It's naming the water. So when the water is named for you, the person who's naming the water can feel like a savior. So it's easy to transfer a certain emotional sensation, an emotional reality to that person, an emotional sense of being a savior to that person because they named the water for me. They made it make sense for me. To realize that they're human and some of them are actually quite flawed, and perhaps the very quality that made them, like the very quality that made Bessel van der Kolk able to be such a charismatic speaker, a leader, someone who had a conviction to like build a thesis and, fight the status quo and get this book out there and teach something to the world, that very personality might be the personality that also made him into somewhat of a bully. Again, allegedly. I am not commenting on the case. I am not a member of the Boston Society. I am not part of, I don't know anything about the ins and outs of the case other than what I've read, right? So maybe those very characteristics that made him so effective at naming the water for you is what made him into an abusive person. So that's even scarier. But I think we tend to do this. For some reason, humans look for gurus and post-traumatic people really look for gurus. We're looking for that one person who can make it make sense. And the self-help world's kind of full of gurus. It's one of the reasons why when I was writing post-traumatic parenting, initially my first manuscript was not for parents. It wasn't a self-help book. It was specifically for clinicians who were working with post-traumatic parents, because the whole self-help world can sometimes have gurus. And I get it, because we're looking for that one person to teach us and to lead us and to save us. Because our trauma app is saying like, you must behave this way, you must behave this way. So when someone has an alternative, it's like, I'm gonna glom onto that. This person has a way out of this. This is great. They must be amazing. And I worry about that. And so I really worried before I wrote a self-help book because of the potential for gurus in the self-help industry. But I felt like I've gotten so much help from many of the books that I've read, right? I've gotten so far because I read books like The Body Keeps the Score, because I read so many seminal books that really helped me process in between therapy and go on my own journey and learn so much that I didn't want to withhold that. I wanted people to be able to benefit from my journey towards post-traumatic parenting, but I worry about that. So yes, I think that traumatized people are specifically susceptible to elevating people to guru status. And the thing about a guru, the thing about this like, awesome savior kind of figure is they must be all wise. I think of the archetype, if you think about Jungian psychotherapy, the archetype of like the wise wizard, right? The Dumbledore, the Gandalf, the perfect wise wizard who just has the perfect answer for everything and even has great taste in candy, right? They know it all. Right? We have those archetypes of that, like, very often it's like the saintly father figure who is the all-powerful wizard, wise guide on our hero's journey. So when we're doing our journey out of trauma, unconsciously we do look for that wise guide. We're looking for our Dumbledore, we're looking for our Gandalf. I'm sure there are so many more examples of, that wise wizard mentor, that savior figure that leads us out of this, of this like wilderness that we're in. So our brains are kind of primed to look for that figure, and that figure is supposed to be all-knowing and all-powerful and all-perfect and all-wise. So when they're not, when maybe they're really, really, really smart but not very wise, or maybe when they're really, 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 really knowledgeable in their area of expertise, but a horrible human being in every other area, we're not set up for that. We're not set up for, our Dumbledores to have flaws. We're not set up for that. Gandalf is not supposed to, not be smart, right? Or not be smart about human nature and people. He's supposed to be all wise. So we set ourselves up for that. So I think it's always important that when you read a book, you're reading a thesis. You're reading the product of this person's cognitive process, and they're making an argument. And the argument is either going to hold water or it's not going to hold water. But they're not necessarily establishing themselves as this wonderful, wise mentor. They're just the author of the book. Their words make sense. They've taught me something. But that's all it was. Even if I felt this illusion of closeness, like, wow, he gets me. He really gets me. Like, was he in my brain? I can think of so many books like that where the authors then let me down in some way. And it's like, whoa, were you in my brain? But wow, you get it. But, then you feel affection for someone because they make you feel gotten and felt. But it's just a book. It's the product of their brain. So it's not the product of their entire self and their entire personness. It's a product of what they think. So I can accept your logic and accept what you're thinking and learn from your book and learn from everything. And also know that you are a flawed and imperfect human being. And yeah, is it scary to think, well, the guy who wrote about trauma and educated me about trauma was willing to inflict trauma on other people? Like he knows how bad trauma is. Yeah, that's disappointing. If it indeed happened, and again, I'm just saying that because we're always supposed to say alleged until something's proved in a court of law, and I am not a lawyer. Yeah, that's very disappointing. It's very sad. I think human nature is such that we are, hopefully not all judged by our worst moments and, praised for our best moments. I think we're all a mixed bag. I can certainly think of times that I messed up in my life. Like, I'm hoping that I'm not presenting myself as a perfect person. I'm no Bessel van der Kolk, right? Like, I did not write a book that was on top of the New York Times bestseller list for 4 million weeks or whatever it was. But like in writing my book, I also had that worry. I certainly don't want to portray myself like I wrote a book about parenting. I must be a perfect parent. I think that I am a person on a journey. And one of the things I think that happens when you're very, very successful is you start believing your own PR and you start ignoring feedback. And I think that anybody who is in that type of position needs some checks and balances. Honestly speaking, I've heard this. I don't know if it's true that Bessel van der Kolk himself is not a parent, or maybe he's a step parent. But one of the things that really gives you some checks and balances is like parenting teenagers and adult children, because anybody's gonna give you some doses of truth about yourself, it's your kids. So, but yeah, checks and balances. Figure out who are your checks and balances people. So in your own life, if you ever worry, wait, if Bessel van der Kolk could traumatize people and be so insensitive to the harm he was causing, what about me? When have I harmed people? Then think for yourself. This is something that I've done. Who are my red line people? Who are the people who will tell me when I'm approaching a red line? Who will hold me to task? What are the checks and balances in my life that will keep me honest? Who are those people? Whose judgment do I respect more than my own? So if I'm confused about what the ethical thing to do in a situation, I'm going to ask that person because I do respect their judgment more than mine. When it's a mental health professional, do they have a supervisor? They don't necessarily have to tell you who their supervisor is. I think some people are more forthcoming about that but are they in supervision? Do they have peer supervision? Do they go to their own therapy? Like, are they working on having checks and balances in their own personality, in their own self, so that they never become so big that they forget that, how they come across? I do think that sometimes, and this is just my way of not excusing wrong behavior, but explaining it, I do think that sometimes it's human nature not to realize how we come across. Because to ourselves, we're just me, right? And I'm the me who's telling the story of myself. Recently, I had this experience where I was giving a professional development day to a group of 68 principals. So at one point I was, clearly when it's 68 principals, these are people who are not going to be shy about, telling you if they disagree with you. They're not going to be shy about asking questions. These are people who are used to being heard, who have positions of authority, who are respectable people in their own right, who know what they're talking about. And at one point, someone asked a really tough question. I said, whoa, giving this work, actually it was at the end of the workshop, someone came up to me and she asked a question, and I said, I'm going to need a little time to think about the answer. And I said, wow, that was intense. I need a minute because I'm tired, because that was intense. Speaking to this crowd is like being called into the principal's office 68 times. And the principal said, wait a minute, you're intimidated by us because you're the person with the doctorate who's standing in front of the room, who's very knowledgeable about what she's talking about for the past 4 hours. So, we're all a little intimidated of you. I'm like, I'm not the scary person in the room. You guys are the scary person in the room, right? And it's almost like, yeah, I'm not scary to myself, but I can come across as intimidating. I do have that degree, and when I speak, I speak with authority because I know what I'm talking about. And sometimes I might forget that I could come across as more intimidating than I think I am. And these principals, each principal, is a person. And she doesn't think of herself as particularly intimidating, but when you've been leading a school for many years, you have a certain mantle of authority on you, and you can be intimidating. But I bet every principal in that room, if I ask you, how intimidating are you on a scale of 1 to 10, they would probably say 4 or 5, when it's more like 7 or 8 or 9 or 10, right? And same thing with me. I don't think of myself as particularly scary, but maybe I did come across as more intimidating, more polished, more professional than I thought I was. I thought I was being approachable and friendly, but maybe I was intimidating, right? We don't always know how we come across. So this is not an excuse. I am not excusing bad behavior. It is not okay to abuse the people who work under you. It is not okay to create a hostile work environment. I am not being apologist for that at all. So I just want to make that very clear. But I want to explain how that could happen, how human nature could take someone who really understands trauma so well, and then that person can traumatize. I think it's because we're telling the story of ourselves to ourselves. We're not always aware of how we come across. So, and that's where you need those checks and balances, people, to tell you actually, you're kind of coming across as more scary or more mean or more intimidating than you thought. And hopefully we listen to those red line people, right? We have that little Jiminy Cricket on our shoulder, that little conscience that's like, and maybe we embody that conscience in a human. Like, you tell me. The way I tend to speak too fast when I speak, and I sometimes have someone in the audience motion to me when I'm talking too fast, so I should slow down. Because I need an external person to give me that signal, because when I get excited, I talk real fast. It's just how I am. So that's my take on it, and I hope you've been patient with me thinking it through, because honestly speaking, I was pretty devastated and sad to hear about these allegations about Bessel van der Kolk as well. It was pretty, sad to hear that. So, so I hear you, I'm with you, and anything that I'm doing to try to explain it is not to try to excuse it, it's just I'm trying to get how it could happen. So if you agree, disagree, if you have some thoughts, if there are other authors who named the water for you, you want to tell me about them, maybe I'll read their book and I'll learn something. If there are other authors whose book you read and they made you feel felt, and then you found some pretty horrible things out about them, I'd love to hear about it, because I think we can process that together. If you've enjoyed this video, please click subscribe below. Please tell a friend, maybe a fellow post-traumatic parent who also felt the same way you did when you heard about Bessel van der Kolk or anyone else, any other hero who's let you down. If you want to hang out where your fellow post-traumatic parents hang out, check out at Dr. Koslowitz Psychology on Instagram. You can also listen to the Post-Traumatic Parenting podcast. It's available wherever you get your podcasts. That's where I talk to experts about trauma, parenting, and the intersection between the two. The Post-Traumatic Parenting book is forthcoming from Broadleaf in 2025. There will be a pre-order link on the website, drrobinkoslowitz.com, pretty soon. So I cannot wait to hear what you all think. It's kind of scary putting a book like this out into the world. So I can't wait to hear what all of you think about the book. And please tell a friend, like, comment, share, let people know, because the post-traumatic parenting community grows one post-traumatic parent at a time. Till next time.